The winter wind swept across the high ridges of the Rocky Mountains, bending the tall pines and filling the night with a restless howl. Snow fell in thick curtains, covering the ground in a merciless blanket of white that erased trails and silenced the wilderness. In this vast and untamed country, a man could vanish without a trace, whether by hunger, cold, or the quiet indifference of nature. Elijah McGraw had long accepted this reality. A man in his late 30s, he lived alone in a cabin he had built with his own hands, tucked against a slope where timber grew thick and game often passed. His beard carried more grey than he cared to admit, and his eyes, blue, sharp and watchful, spoke of a life hardened by struggle. A former Civil War scout, Elijah had turned his back on towns and men alike, choosing exile in the mountains where no one demanded loyalty and no one betrayed it. The crackle of his fire and the occasional howl of a wolf were the only voices he trusted anymore. But that night, as the storm worsened, Elijah stumbled upon something that would pull him from his solitude. He had gone out to check his traps, the snow crunching under his heavy boots, when a faint sound reached him, half a cry, half a groan, carried by the wind. At first, he thought it was a trick of his ears, yet when he followed the sound, pushing through the trees, he found her. She lay in the snow, her breath shallow, her legs streaked with blood from a ragged wound. A Lakota woman, wrapped in torn deerskin, her dark hair tangled with ice. Elijah knelt beside her, heart pounding with a confusion he had not felt in years. Helping her meant trouble. Everyone knew the tensions between settlers and tribes ran hot as a branding iron. If her people found her with him, they might think he had caused her harm. If townsfolk discovered he had sheltered a native woman, they might brand him a traitor. And yet, as the snow piled higher and her eyelids fluttered, he knew he could not leave her. Elijah McGraw had seen enough death in his life. He could not carry another ghost on his conscience. "Easy now," he muttered, slipping his arms beneath her and lifting her from the snow. She weighed less than a sack of cornmeal, yet her shivering told him the fight for life was not over. She stirred faintly, whispering in broken English, "No. Leave. Me." Elijah shook his head, his voice rough. "Not tonight. You'll die out here." With heavy steps he carried her back to his cabin, each stride sinking deep in the snow. His muscles ached, his lungs burned, but determination drove him forward. When he finally pushed the cabin door open, heat and light spilled out, chasing away the storm for just a moment. Inside, Elijah laid her near the fire, wrapping her in blankets, working with the steady hands of a man who had stitched his own wounds many times. He cleaned the gash in her leg, ground herbs into a poultice and bound the injury tight. She watched him with wary eyes, pain and fear mingling in their dark depths. He saw defiance there too, the strength of someone who had survived more than he could guess. For a long while silence filled the room, broken only by the storm outside and the hiss of burning logs. Elijah finally spoke, almost to himself. "Reckon you didn't choose to cross paths with me any more than I chose to find you. But here we are." And so began the night that would change everything, a night when a mountain man's solitude cracked, letting in the fragile spark of responsibility and fate. Before the story continues, make sure to subscribe for more powerful tales of survival, honor, and the human spirit on the untamed frontier. Elijah did not know that by morning, the sound of approaching footsteps would test every choice he had ever made. The storm eased by dawn, leaving behind a silence so deep it pressed against the cabin walls. Snow coated the pines in heavy white, their branches bowing low, and smoke from Elijah's chimney rose into the still, pale sky. Inside, the fire burned low, and the woman slept, her breathing steadier, though her face remained drawn with pain. Elijah watched her for a moment, then turned away, letting his thoughts drift back to the life he had chosen and the reasons he lived so far from men. He stepped outside, boots sinking into the new snow. The air was sharp, filling his lungs with cold that stung but also cleared his head. From his cabin, the valley stretched in all directions, pine forest, jagged ridges, and the river that cut through the land like a silver blade. It was a country that demanded respect. Every man who stayed here long enough learned quickly that arrogance brought only death. Elijah had carved his existence from this harsh land with steady hands and unyielding grit. His traps dotted the riverbanks and ridges. In spring, he harvested roots and berries. In summer, he hunted elk and deer. In fall, he stored firewood and dried meat for the long winters. Each task had its rhythm, each season its challenge, and in that cycle he found something that towns and cities never offered: clarity. Yet there was no denying the solitude weighed on him. The war had left him with scars on his body and a deeper wound inside, one that whispered that people could not be trusted. He had seen men sell one another for a handful of coins, neighbors turn on each other in the name of survival. When the fighting ended, he walked away from it all. No banners, no brotherhood, no town to call home. Just the wilderness and his own shadow. Still, the mountains carried their own voices. The howl of wolves at night reminded him he was not alone. The tracks of elk and bear in the snow told stories as real as any spoken by men, and from time to time, faint signs reminded him that others shared this land too. Smoke rising far off in the trees, painted symbols on stones near the river, the echo of drums carried by the wind. He had crossed paths with tribes before, always at a distance, always with caution. Some were willing to trade pelts or herbs for steel tools and blankets. Others looked at him with the same suspicion he gave them, neither side willing to risk trust. Elijah never stayed long in those encounters. He preferred to walk his line alone, leaving behind no ties, no debts. But now, with the woman lying inside his cabin, the line he had drawn for himself blurred. He knew enough of tribal ways to understand that she was not just a wanderer. Somewhere her people searched for her. If they found her in his care, what would they believe? That he had wounded her? That he had taken her against her will? A man could lose his life in the blink of an eye for less. He leaned on the cabin doorframe, staring out at the snowbound valley. His breath formed clouds in the cold, and doubt pressed heavy on his chest. He could have walked past her in the storm. He could have told himself it was not his concern, but he hadn't, and there was no undoing it now. Inside, the fire popped, and he heard a faint movement. She stirred, murmuring words he did not understand, her voice soft but restless. Elijah felt a pang of unease twist in his stomach. He had given her shelter, but shelter came with consequences. The wilderness was merciless, but it was honest. People, however, people carried judgment, suspicion, and grudges, and Elijah knew deep down that his choice to save her would soon pull him into the very struggles he had fled. The morning sun broke weakly through the clouds, sending pale light across the snow-covered valley. Elijah sat at the edge of his cabin's hearth, sharpening his knife on a whetstone, though his attention kept drifting to the woman resting under his blankets. Her breathing was uneven, and every so often a low groan escaped her lips. The wound in her leg still seeped faintly, but the bleeding had slowed. Elijah set the knife aside and leaned closer. The skin around the gash was hot, and he knew infection was the real enemy now. He fetched a small jar from his shelf, a mixture of pine resin and crushed yarrow he had used on his own injuries more than once. With careful hands, he unwrapped the bloodied cloth, cleaned the wound with melted snow water, and pressed the salve into place. She stirred at his touch, her eyes opening halfway. Her gaze darted around the cabin, then fixed on him with suspicion. "Why, you help?" Her English was rough, each word strained. Elijah answered in a low, steady tone. "Because leaving you out there would have been the same as killing you. I ain't a killer." She seemed to study him, her brow furrowed. "Many white men kill." The words cut sharper than his knife. Elijah swallowed hard and forced himself to meet her eyes. "I'm not them." She closed her eyes again, but her breathing eased slightly, as if his answer, though not trusted, carried enough weight to let her rest a little. For hours, Elijah tended to her between his daily tasks. He fetched water from the creek, chopped kindling, and checked the traps he'd set close to the cabin. Each time he returned, he half expected to find her gone, either from death or from some strength she had mustered to crawl back into the wilderness. But each time, she remained where she was, her spirit fierce, yet her body frail. At midday, when the fire's heat filled the cabin, she spoke again, her voice weak. "My name, Aylin." Elijah paused, surprised she would share it. He nodded. Elijah McGraw. She repeated it softly, shaping the unfamiliar sound. Elijah. Her accent gave it a different rhythm, but there was something grounding in hearing his name spoken by another human being after so long. He handed her a wooden cup filled with broth he had made from venison bones. She accepted it with trembling hands, spilling some before sipping. The steam curled upward, and a small color returned to her cheeks. "You are alone here?" she asked after a long silence. Elijah hesitated. "By choice." "Why?" He rubbed a hand across his beard, the answer heavy on his chest. "Because men bring more pain than the mountains ever could. Out here the land is harsh, but it's honest." Aylin studied him again, her dark eyes searching. She said nothing, but Elijah felt the weight of her silence. It was not the silence of weakness, but of judgment withheld. That night, as the storm built again outside, Elijah checked her bandages once more. Her fever worried him, but the herbs seemed to hold it at bay. She caught his hand as he worked, her grip surprisingly strong. "You saved me," she said, her words firmer than before. "But maybe cost for you." Elijah met her gaze, the firelight reflecting in both their eyes. "Maybe so. But I reckon a man's worth ain't measured by what he saves for himself. It's by what he's willing to give." Her hand released his, and she turned her face toward the flames, her breathing slowing as sleep claimed her again. Elijah leaned back, staring at the cabin roof. He had chosen to help her, and there was no undoing that choice now. But a nagging thought gnawed at him. The wilderness had many eyes, and someone, somewhere, might already know she was with him. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the cabin walls. Elijah sat on his stool, mending a torn glove with needle and sinew thread. Across the room, Aylin stirred, her eyes half open, the fever having eased. She watched him work for a moment, silent, then drew in a slow breath. "You wish to know," she said, her voice quiet, broken, but steady. Elijah glanced at her, setting the glove aside. "Know what? Why I was alone, why I bleed in the snow." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "If you want to tell it, I'll listen. If not, I won't pry." Her gaze fixed on the fire, and she began. "My husband, his name was Matto. He was hunter, strong, brave. He'd go with others to trade near the river. White men came. They said, 'Bring peace, bring goods.' But they lied. Guns fired. Matto fell." Her voice caught, but she forced herself on. "I run. Many run. Some caught, some killed. I not stop running." "My leg!" She touched the bandaged wound with trembling fingers. "The bullet found me when I looked back." Elijah's jaw tightened. He had seen betrayal before, promises made and broken with blood. Her words painted a picture he could almost smell, the smoke, the screams, the crack of rifles. He nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." Aylin's eyes narrowed. "Sorry does not bring him back." He didn't flinch. "No, it doesn't." She studied him as though weighing his honesty. After a long silence, she added, "Many of my people believe no white man keeps truth, but Matto believed some could. He told me, 'There are men who fight their own kind, men who walk alone, who know pain. They are different.'" Elijah felt the words settle in him like stones. He had walked away from every man he knew, leaving behind only war and broken bonds. To hear her husband had spoken of men like him, it stirred something he wasn't ready to name. Aylin's gaze softened, but only slightly. "You saved me. But saving is not same as trust. I do not trust yet." "That's fair," Elijah said. "Trust ain't built in a night." Her lips pressed tight, as if holding back more. Then she whispered, "I dream of Matto. He tell me I must live, even when I wish to follow him. He say, 'Live, Aylin, live for our children, even if they do not come.'" The fire crackled, filling the heavy silence. Elijah felt a knot in his chest. He thought of the war, of men who had fallen beside him, of promises he had once made to their widows, never kept. He had carried guilt for years, burying it under snow and pine. "You ever think," he said slowly, "that maybe living when others fall is the hardest fight a body can face?" Aylin turned her head, her eyes meeting his. "Yes, but it is fight I must take." The flicker of strength in her voice reminded Elijah of why he had lifted her from the snow. Not because she was helpless, but because she still carried the fire of someone unwilling to surrender. As the night deepened, Aylin drifted back into sleep, her breathing calmer. Elijah leaned back against the wall, staring at the rafters above. He thought of Matto, a man he had never met, and of the strange bridge Aylin had placed between them. Somewhere in that thought lay danger, but also a faint glimmer of something he had not felt in years: connection. Elijah closed his eyes, though rest came hard. The widow's past was heavy, and he knew it would not stay buried. The mountains had a way of carrying stories on the wind, and soon enough her story would reach the ears of others. The morning broke sharp and cold, the kind of air that cut through fur and leather alike. Elijah stepped outside with his rifle slung over his shoulder, his breath rising in steady clouds. He scanned the ridges as he always did, cautious habit etched into his bones. The forest was still, too still, and his gut tightened. Something was different. When he returned to the cabin, Aylin was awake, propped against the wall with the blankets gathered around her. Her eyes carried a strange tension, as though she sensed what he had. She whispered, "They come." Elijah frowned. "Who?" "My people." Before he could answer, movement stirred among the trees. Shadows flitted between the pines, silent but sure. A dozen warriors appeared, their bows strung, rifles in hand, faces painted in solemn colors of earth and ash. They spread in a half-circle around the cabin, every eye fixed on him. Elijah's pulse quickened. He rested his rifle against the wall inside, leaving his hands visible when he stepped back to the doorway. A tall figure broke from the group, a man with braided hair tied in eagle feathers and a scar running from his temple to his jaw. His gaze burned with authority. Aylin's lips parted. "Chaska," she murmured, her voice carrying both relief and dread. The leader's voice was deep and firm. "Why does she lie in your shelter, white man? What did you do?" Elijah held his ground. "Found her in the snow, half dead. Brought her here, patched her wound, that's the whole of it." Chaska's eyes narrowed. "Many times your kind say such words. Many times they are lies." Aylin struggled to sit straighter, her face pale but determined. "He speaks true, he saved me. Without him I would be gone." One of the younger warriors spat into the snow. Better she had died than fall into his hands. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group, the tension thick enough to choke. Elijah clenched his fists, but forced his voice to remain steady. "I didn't ask her to come here. I didn't ask for any of this. But I wasn't about to let her die like a dog in the storm." Chaska stepped closer, his presence looming. "Why?" "What do you gain?" Elijah met his gaze without flinching. "Nothing. A man don't need gain to do what's right." Aylin's voice rose, weak but fierce. "He is not like the others. He carried me when I could not walk. He gave me warmth, food, medicine. He asked for nothing." The warriors shifted uneasily, some glancing at each other, others tightening their grips on weapons. Elijah felt the weight of their mistrust, like a noose tightening around his neck. He knew one wrong word could spark bloodshed. Finally, Chaska raised his hand, silencing the murmurs. His eyes flicked from Elijah to Aylin. "You are alive because of him, but that does not wash away what his people have done." Elijah's jaw tightened. "I ain't his people." "Not anymore." The words hung in the cold air, raw and heavy. Chaska studied him for a long moment as if measuring his soul. Then he spoke to his warriors in Lakota, words Elijah could not understand. The men hesitated, then lowered their weapons slightly, though suspicion lingered in every glance. Aylin reached for Elijah's sleeve, her touch light but urgent. "You must prove hot." "They will not take only my word." Elijah nodded once. He understood. Saving her had been the easy part. Facing the weight of her people's judgment would be another battle entirely. The morning sun climbed higher, its light stark on the snow, but the air remained heavy with danger. For Elijah, the question was no longer whether he had done the right thing. It was whether the right thing would cost him his life. The air around the cabin carried a brittle silence, broken only by the crunch of boots as Chaska stepped closer. His eyes, sharp as flint, never left Elijah. The warriors stood in a ring, their weapons lowered but not forgotten. Aelin's plea had saved Elijah from their immediate wrath, but it was clear mercy would not come cheap. Chaska spoke in measured English, his tone heavy with judgment. "Words are thin, mountain man. Any tongue can shape them. Deeds show truth. You must prove your honor." Elijah's shoulders stiffened. "And how do you aim to measure it?" The scarred leader gestured toward the forest. "We test you in the way of the hunter and the way of the heart. If you are false, we will know. If you are true, the spirits will guide." A younger warrior sneered. "He will fail. His kind know only greed and cowardice." Elijah ignored the insult, though anger stirred in his gut. He had no interest in contests or proving himself to strangers, but Aelin's life, and maybe his own, balanced on the edge of this demand. He gave a curt nod. "All right. What do you want from me?" Two men stepped forward, placing a bow and a spear at Chaska's feet. The leader pointed first to the bow. "There is elk sign on the ridge. Bring back meat before the sun falls. A man who cannot feed others cannot be trusted." Then he tapped the spear. "And if danger meets you, use this, not your fire weapon. We see if you stand brave without the thunder of powder." Elijah's jaw tightened. "You're asking me to walk into the woods in winter with tools I've never trained with and bring back meat before dark?" Chaska's gaze hardened. "If your spirit is strong, it will guide your hand." Elijah glanced at Aelin. She looked at him with quiet intensity, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. He read in her eyes both fear and faith. She wanted him to succeed, not for his pride, but because it might be the only way to keep blood from spilling. He bent and picked up the bow, testing the string. It was well made, sinew taut, grip worn smooth from years of use. The spear felt foreign in his hand, but its weight carried balance. He gave a short nod. "Then I'll see you by sundown." The warriors parted, letting him pass into the snow-laden forest. Their eyes followed him, suspicion thick as the cold. Each step Elijah took sank deep, his breath steady as he forced his mind into focus. He had tracked game all his life, but never with bow or spear. This test wasn't about skill alone. It was about whether he could adapt, whether he could survive under their rules. Hours passed as he moved across the ridge, reading signs in the snow. Hoofprints scattered near the creek, fresh scat marking the trail. He crouched low, every sense sharpened. Twice he loosed arrows, both clattering harmlessly into bark. His hands weren't trained for the bow, and frustration gnawed at him, but giving up meant losing more than his own pride. Finally, near dusk, he spotted a young elk moving slowly through the timber. Elijah steadied his breathing, gripped the spear, and waited for his chance. When the animal lowered its head to paw the snow, he crept close, heart hammering, and hurled the weapon with all his strength. The spear struck true, not clean, but enough to bring the elk down. He finished the task quickly, whispering thanks as he had seen tribesmen do. Dragging the meat back through the snow, Elijah reached the cabin just as the sun dipped low. The warriors stood waiting, Chaska at their head. Elijah dropped the carcass at their feet, sweat freezing on his brow. "I'm no Lakota hunter," he said, voice rough, "but I did what you asked." Chaska's gaze lingered on the elk, then on Elijah. He said nothing, but for the first time the hardness in his eyes wavered. The elk meat lay in the snow, steam rising from its body in the bitter air. Chaska crouched beside it, running his hand along the hide, his face unreadable. At last he straightened and spoke in Lakota to the gathered warriors. Their voices answered in low murmurs, neither approval nor anger, but something between. Then Chaska turned to Elijah. "You did not fail, that much is plain." Elijah exhaled slowly, his muscles aching from the long haul through snow. "That enough to let me keep breath another day?" The faintest trace of a smile ghosted across Chaska's scarred face, gone almost as soon as it appeared. "You live, but you are watched." The warriors divided the elk quickly, carrying portions back toward their camp. The smell of blood mingled with the pine-scented wind, and for the first time Elijah felt the tension ease, though not dissolve. Aylin, leaning weakly in the doorway, caught his eye and gave a single nod. Over the following days, an uneasy rhythm grew between Elijah and the tribe that camped not far from his cabin. The hunters ranged the forest while Elijah cut firewood, his axe ringing through the cold air. Sometimes the warriors passed him on the trail, their eyes sharp, their words few. He nodded, never pressing, never asking for more than silence in return. Aylin healed slowly, her strength returning with each sunrise. She began to move about the cabin with a limp, helping where she could, grinding herbs, stitching torn cloth, humming soft songs that carried the cadence of the plains. Elijah listened, not understanding the words, but feeling their weight. They spoke of mourning, but also of endurance. One morning, while he mended a snare by the creek, Aylin joined him outside for the first time. She steadied herself with a staff Elijah had fashioned from pine. The winter sun lit her face, and though her cheeks were pale, her eyes held a spark of quiet resilience. "You live alone many years," she said, her breath clouding in the air. "Long enough," Elijah replied. "Why?" He hesitated. "Because every time I trusted men, it cost me. Out here the mountains take their toll, but they don't lie. Can't say the same for folks." Aylin tapped the ground with her staff. "But even mountains fall. Snow slides, rivers flood, fire burns. Still, you return to them." Elijah frowned, considering her words. "The difference is mountains don't mean harm. Men often do." She tilted her head, her gaze lingering. "Not all. My Matto, he believed some men fight for more than themselves. He thought perhaps you are one." Elijah's throat tightened. "You put a lot of faith in a man you barely know." "No," she corrected softly. "I put faith in what he saw before he died." He believed. The words clung to Elijah long after, echoing in the hollow places of his chest. Later that week, Chaska came to the cabin, his presence filling the doorway. "You keep her safe," he said bluntly, "but danger does not end. Settlers move near. They cut trees, take land, break promises. Soon choices will come." Elijah met his gaze. "And you reckon I'll be caught in the middle?" "You are already," Chaska said. The truth in those words pressed on Elijah like the weight of falling snow. He had wanted nothing but solitude, but now threads of responsibility tied him to Aylin, to her people, and to the fragile peace between them. That night, as the fire cracked and Aylin sang softly to herself, Elijah lay awake. He realized the silence he once cherished now felt heavier, edged with expectation. The mountains had not changed, but he had, and though he tried to deny it, a part of him wondered whether solitude was still the shield he believed it to be. The snow softened in the valley, giving way to patches of dark earth and the promise of spring. But with the thaw came unease, carried like a shadow across every ridge. Elijah felt it first in the silence of the forest, the kind that wasn't natural, the kind that warned of men nearby. He noticed cut stumps where no axe of his had swung, boot tracks pressed into the damp soil, and smoke curling from places where no Lakota fire had been lit. One evening, while Elijah split wood by the cabin, Aylin came limping from the creek, her staff steady in her hand. Her face carried worry. "I hear talk from my people," she said. "Settlers build closer. They make cabins near river. They say land is theirs." Elijah wiped the sweat from his brow, the axe hanging at his side. "That river's fed them tribes for longer than any white man's been west of the Mississippi." She nodded, her voice tight. "Yes, but white men do not care for old ways. They bring fences, walls, rules. My people will not bow. There will be blood." Elijah felt the knot in his chest tighten. He had lived through one war already, seen men tear each other apart over land, pride, and power. He had thought he had left all that behind in these mountains, but war had a way of finding men who wanted no part of it. 2 days later, his fears were confirmed. A group of settlers rode up the slope, 5 men on horses, their rifles strapped to saddles. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man with a thick beard, called out when he spotted Elijah hauling water. "McGraw!" Heard you've been keeping strange company. His words dripped suspicion. Elijah's hand tightened around the bucket. And what business is that of yours, Carter? The man smirked. Word travels. Folks downriver say you've been sheltering one of them redskins. Can't say the town's too happy about it. You know how these things look. Behind Carter, the other men muttered, eyes hard and hungry for conflict. Elijah set the bucket down slowly. She was half dead when I found her. I did what any man with a shred of decency would have done. That's all there is to it. Carter leaned in his saddle, his voice low and sharp. You think they'd do the same for you? You're treading dangerous ground, McGraw. You keep this up, you'll find yourself on the wrong side of both sides. Elijah's jaw clenched, but he didn't rise to the bait. I'll live how I see fit. You tell your folks in town to mind their own business. The men rode off with laughter that carried like knives through the trees. Elijah watched them go, his gut heavy. Their words weren't empty. Rumors spread fast, and once suspicion took root, it grew like wildfire. That night, Chaska came to the cabin, his expression storm-dark. Our scouts saw white men near the river. They cut trees, set traps. They will not stop. Elijah nodded grimly. I saw them myself. Carter and his kind. They've got no intention of sharing this land. Chaska's eyes burned. Then we will drive them out. We will show them whose ground this is. Aylin, who had been listening from her seat by the fire, shook her head. More blood will not bring peace. It will only bring more death. The two locked eyes, the weight of history heavy between them. Elijah stood by the fire, silent, torn. He understood both sides too well. The fury of men whose homes were threatened, the hunger of settlers who claimed land that wasn't theirs. And now, by saving one woman, he stood in the center of a storm that would not wait for his permission to break. The thaw deepened as spring crept across the valley, though the night still bit cold. Snow melted from the pines, dripping steadily into the earth, and the river roared louder with each passing day. Life stirred again in the forest, elk moving in herds, birds returning with song, and with it came a sense of change Elijah could not ignore. Aylin's wound had knit well enough for her to walk short distances without the staff. Each day she ventured farther from the cabin, gathering herbs she recognized, humming old songs as she worked. The limp remained, but her spirit seemed stronger with every step. Elijah watched her closely, not out of doubt, but out of respect. He saw in her the resilience of someone who had survived loss without surrendering to it. One evening, as the fire warmed the cabin, Aylin placed a bundle of dried roots on the table. These heal stomach, good for your people too. Elijah raised a brow. My people? She met his gaze steadily. You are between worlds, not only white, not Lakota. You walk path alone. That path is dangerous. He leaned back, folding his arms. I've done fine on my own. Aylin shook her head. No. You survive, but surviving is not living. The words struck deeper than he cared to admit. He thought of long winters spent in silence, of meals eaten with no voice but the fire for company. For years, he had told himself it was enough. But now, sitting across from Aylin, he wondered if he had mistaken solitude for strength. She broke the silence, her tone gentler. My husband Matto wished for peace. He wanted white men and Lakota to share ground without blood. Many laughed at him, said he was dreamer, but he believed. He believed even when death found him. Elijah stared into the flames, jaw tight. Dreamers don't last long in this world. Aylin's eyes flashed. Then who will make change if not dreamers? Warriors fight, settlers take, leaders shout. But dreamers, they plant seeds. Seeds grow even in hard soil. Her conviction unsettled him, not because he doubted her, but because it stirred something in his chest, something he had buried under years of bitterness. He had walked away from men who betrayed trust, from a nation that demanded sacrifice without giving back. Yet here was a widow, broken but unyielding, asking him to see possibility where he saw only scars. The next morning, Elijah joined Chaska and two hunters to check traps along the ridges. The warriors moved like shadows, their steps silent in the underbrush. Elijah carried his rifle but spoke little, sensing the distance between them. One of the younger men muttered in Lakota, a word Elijah couldn't understand, but the sneer in his tone made its meaning plain. Chaska silenced him with a sharp glance, but said nothing more. When they returned with game, Aylin stepped forward, helping to dress the animals with quick, practiced hands. The warriors watched her, then cast sidelong glances at Elijah, as if measuring the bond forming between them. Later, when the others left, Elijah asked her, "You trust me enough to fight for me before your people. Why?" She paused, wiping her hands on a cloth. "Because I see truth in you. You hide behind walls of stone inside, but truth shows in what you do, not what you say." Elijah felt the words land heavy. He wanted to deny them, to retreat into the safety of silence. But her eyes held him steady, and for the first time in years, he did not feel like a ghost drifting through the world. That night, as coyotes called across the valley, Elijah lay awake, her voice echoing in his mind. "Seeds," she had said. "Seeds grow, even in hard soil." He wondered if she saw something in him worth planting, something he had long believed dead. The valley carried a stillness that felt wrong. Elijah noticed it first in the absence of birds, then in the way the wind shifted, carrying the faint tang of smoke. By the time a young Lakota scout came running into the camp, his chest heaving, Elijah already knew something had broken. The boy's words tumbled out in Lakota, but Elijah caught enough from the gestures. Blood, guns, settlers. Chaska's face hardened as he listened. Then he barked orders, and the camp erupted into motion. Warriors grabbed rifles and bows, women pulled children close, and the tension in the air snapped taut like a bowstring. Elijah caught Aylin's arm. "What happened?" Her lips pressed thin, her eyes dark. "Hunters from our people were ambushed. Settlers waited near the river, shot them down. 2 dead. 1 missing." Elijah felt the weight of it crash into his chest. He had known Carter and his men were circling, but he hadn't thought they'd strike so bold so soon. Chaska turned on him, fury sharp in his voice. "This is your doing. You sheltered her, and now they grow bold, thinking you their ally. They believe you betray us." Elijah bristled. "Don't put their hate on me. I didn't tell them where your people hunt. Yet they knew," Chaska snapped. "Someone told them, and you, Mountain Man, are the only one who walks between us and them." The words struck deep, sharper than any blade. Elijah's fists clenched, but he forced his voice low. "I had no hand in this. You can hate me if you need to, but don't call me a traitor." The warriors around Chaska muttered, their suspicion heavy. Elijah felt the burn of their eyes on him, each glance a weight dragging him down. He had saved Aylin, hunted for them, bled with effort to prove himself, and still the line between him and them stood tall as any wall. Aylin stepped forward, her limp sharp but her voice steady. "He is not false. Without him I would be dead. If he wished us harm, he would have left me in the snow." Her defense silenced the circle for a moment, but the doubt did not vanish. Elijah saw it, and it cut deep. That night, as the tribe gathered around fires, voices rose in heated debate. Some demanded immediate retaliation against the settlers, others urged caution, fearing more lives lost. Through it all, Elijah sat apart, his mind a storm. He remembered Carter's warning that by helping Aylin he'd find himself hated by both sides. Now the truth of it pressed down like iron chains. When Aylin joined him, her face was lit by firelight, her eyes reflecting the turmoil around them. "You think to leave?" she said quietly. Elijah rubbed a hand over his beard, weary. "I don't see a place for me here, not with them looking at me like I've got blood on my hands. And if I go back to town, they'll string me up for taking your side. Either way, I'm caught." She studied him, her voice steady but soft. "Matto once said, 'When the path splits, the harder road often leads to truth. You can walk away, yes, but you will carry the weight of it forever.'" Elijah looked at her, and in her eyes he saw not accusation but conviction. She had lost her husband, her home, nearly her life, yet she still spoke of choosing to fight for something greater than herself. He felt the old wound in him stir, the part of him that had once believed in loyalty, in standing for more than survival. He closed his eyes. drew a slow breath, and let the decision settle in his bones. I ain't running. Not this time. Outside, the night echoed with the cries of warriors preparing for war, and Elijah knew the storm was only beginning. The camp was alive with restless energy, a storm of voices and movement beneath the pale glow of the moon. Warriors sharpened blades, checked rifles, and bound feathers to their hair in solemn silence. Women prepared food and water, whispering prayers for protection, while children huddled close to the fires, wide-eyed and afraid. The smell of smoke, leather, and fear thickened the night air. Elijah stood near his cabin, watching as Chaska paced like a wolf, issuing orders with sharp gestures. The leader's scarred face was etched with rage, his voice cutting through the night. They think they can spill our blood and sleep safe. Tomorrow, we strike at dawn. We take their lives for the lives they stole. The warriors answered with fierce cries, their voices echoing against the mountains. Elijah felt the sound sink into his chest, like a drumbeat of doom. He had heard it before on fields of war, just before men charged into slaughter. His stomach knotted, his breath heavy in the cold. Aylin approached, her limp sharp, her eyes shadowed with worry. "You see what he plans," she said quietly. "I see it," Elijah muttered. "And I've seen how it ends. Too many bodies in the dirt. Too many graves dug shallow. Blood calls for more blood, and it never stops." Aylin's hand brushed his arm, her touch steady. "Then you must speak. If not you, who?" Elijah shook his head. "Chaska won't hear me. To him, I'm just another white man, maybe worse." Her eyes locked on his. "He will hear if I stand with you." Moments later, Elijah stepped forward into the circle of warriors. The firelight painted his face in hard lines, the flames flickering against his rough features. Chaska turned on him instantly, fury blazing. "You have no voice here, mountain man. This is not your fight." Elijah's voice came low but steady. "It became my fight the moment Carter and his men came up my ridge, spitting lies about me. They're not just after your people. They're after anyone who won't bow to their greed. Strike them now, and they'll bring more, twice as many, with no thought but vengeance." A younger warrior barked, "So we do nothing. Let them kill us like cattle." Elijah's eyes burned with memory. "No, you fight when the ground is right, when the odds favor survival, not when anger blinds you. I've walked battlefields, seen men throw themselves into fire because rage drove them. All it left was broken bodies for the crows." Chaska's lip curled. "You speak of battles that were not ours. You do not know the weight we carry." Aylin stepped forward, her voice strong despite her limp. "He knows loss. He carries it as I do. Mato believed there are men who walk between worlds, men who can see what we cannot. Elijah is such a man. If we do not listen, we may lose more than warriors. We may lose all." The camp fell into uneasy silence, the crackle of fire the only sound. Chaska stared at Elijah, the firelight glinting in his eyes. For a long moment it seemed he would dismiss him, but then his voice dropped low. "You say wait. You say fight on better ground. Then tell me, when is that ground found?" Elijah drew a breath. "When you have knowledge, when you know their numbers, their weapons, their weaknesses, not in a blind charge before dawn." The words hung heavy in the smoke-filled air. Some warriors nodded slightly, others scowled, but the frenzy had dulled, replaced by uneasy thought. Chaska finally spoke. "One night more, we send scouts. If your words are empty, mountain man, the blood spilled will be on your head." Elijah met his gaze, unflinching. "Then I'll carry that weight. But I won't stand by and watch men die for nothing." The circle broke slowly, the warriors dispersing into the shadows. Aylin's hand brushed Elijah's once more, a whisper of gratitude. But he knew the reprieve was fragile. One misstep, and the valley would still drown in blood. Dawn spread a pale light over the valley, the mist rising from the river like ghostly breath. The scouts had returned in the night, their faces grim. They spoke of settlers camped along the water's edge, building crude shacks and fences, armed with rifles and arrogance. The numbers were fewer than Chaska feared, but still enough to wound the tribe if a clash came. Elijah stood with Aylin near the fire as the warriors gathered to hear the report. Chaska's jaw was tight, his scarred face drawn with anger. "They settle on ground that is ours," he declared. "They spill our blood and now stake their claim. There will be no peace while they breathe." The warriors roared their agreement, but Elijah stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise. "Then hear me. You strike them now. You invite war without end. They'll send more men, more guns, more death. I've seen it. I know it." Murmurs spread through the circle, some nodding, others shaking their heads. Chaska's glare burned into him. "Then what? Do we bow? Do we let them take the river, the hunting grounds, the bones of our fathers?" "No," Elijah said firmly. "You face them, but not with guns first, with words. You stand in front of them and make your claim. Show them you are not thieves in the night. If they want war, let them show their true faces before their God and their own men." Aelin's voice rose beside him, steady as stone. "He is right. Matto dreamed of peace, but peace is not silence. It is standing strong without the blade, until the blade is forced into your hand." Chaska looked at her, the grief in his eyes flickering with doubt. Finally, with a sharp nod, he spoke. "One chance. We go, but if they spit on our words, we answer with fire." The decision was made. By midday, the tribe moved down toward the river, Elijah and Aelin walking at their side. Elijah's heart beat hard, every step a weight. He had faced death before, but never like this. Not standing between two worlds, both ready to call him enemy. The settlers stood in a rough line outside their cabins when the Lakota approached. Carter was there, his thick beard bristling, rifle slung across his chest. His men bristled with weapons, their eyes full of suspicion and pride. Carter's voice rang out. "Well, I'll be damned. The mountain man walks with the savages, I warned you, McGraw." Elijah stepped forward, his voice hard as flint. "These people ain't thieves, Carter. This land was theirs long before you set foot here." Carter spat into the dirt. "That's where you're wrong. This land's free for any man willing to tame it, and I don't take kindly to being lectured by some hermit who's lost his wits." Chaska advanced, his warriors steady behind him. His words, translated by Aelin, rang like iron. "You spill our blood, then call the land yours. You dishonor your word, your God, and yourselves. Leave now, or face the weight of our anger." Carter laughed, the sound hollow and mean. "You think you scare us? We've whipped worse than you." The settlers behind him jeered, their rifles raised higher. Elijah felt the tension coil like a rattler ready to strike. His chest burned with the weight of choice. He could stay silent and let fury rule, or he could throw himself into the fire, knowing either side might tear him apart. He stepped between them, raising his voice above the growing shouts. "Enough! You all think you're fighting for pride, but pride won't feed your children, and it won't keep you warm at night. You want war? Then know this. It won't be quick, and it won't be clean. Every one of you will bleed." His words hung in the cold air, the silence sharp and dangerous. Neither side lowered their weapons. Elijah felt the valley hold its breath, waiting for the crack of a rifle that could set the whole world ablaze. The river roared behind them, swollen with snowmelt, its voice rising like the heartbeat of the land. On one side stood Chaska and his warriors, their bows strung, rifles at the ready, faces painted with the stern silence of men prepared to die. On the other, Carter and his settlers, their boots dug into the mud, eyes sharp, fingers twitching near the triggers of their guns. And between them, Elijah stood alone, feeling the air split with the weight of hatred. No one spoke. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Elijah felt his chest tighten, memories of battlefields rushing back, the screams, the smoke, the senseless waste. He would not let that valley become another graveyard. He raised his hands slowly, voice steady but edged with steel. "You all see yourselves as men of honor, but look at where you stand. You're pointing death at each other over land you'll both lose if blood stains it," Carter sneered. "Spare us the sermon, McGraw. You've thrown in with them. Your word means nothing." Elijah's jaw tightened. "I threw in with what's right. You ambushed hunters, Carter. You drew first blood. You think that makes you strong? It makes you a coward hiding behind a rifle." One of the settlers growled, "Say that again and see how fast you drop." Before Elijah could answer, Chaska stepped forward, his voice like thunder. "We do not hide. We stand in the open, ready for the fight you bring. You call us savages, but it is you who kill without warning." The settlers shifted uneasily at his words, but Carter barked a laugh. "We don't answer to you." Elijah took a step closer to Carter, locking eyes with him. "Then answer to me. You know me, Carter. You know I've walked through more hell than you can imagine. I buried men braver than you under dirt, not far from here. I've seen the cost of pride, and it don't buy nothing but graves. Is that the legacy you want for your people?" Carter's face flushed red, his knuckles white around his rifle. But behind him, a few settlers lowered their guns slightly, doubt flickering across their faces. Elijah seized the moment. He turned to the Lakota, his voice carrying across the valley. "And you, how many children will grow without fathers if you spill blood here today? How many more widows will cry out to the night? You say you fight for your people, but dead men don't feed the living. Sometimes the bravest fight is holding the line without firing the first shot." The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. Elijah's heart pounded, every muscle tight. He could feel both sides teetering on the edge, ready to fall into war or pull back. Aylin stepped forward then, her limp steady but her voice unshaken. "My husband died believing in peace. His blood is already on this ground. If you fight now, his dream dies with him. But if you stand back, if you choose life over death, then maybe his spirit will not be in vain." Her words cut through the anger like a blade. The warriors glanced at each other, their eyes softer, torn between rage and her plea. Even some of Carter's men shifted uncomfortably, their rifles lowering further. Elijah drew a slow breath. "You all came here thinking only of enemies, but hear me now. You walk away today, and you walk away with your people alive. You fire one shot, and none of you will leave this valley whole. Choose." The river roared louder, the valley still poised on the edge of chaos. Carter's finger twitched near his trigger, Chaska's hand hovered near his knife, and the world seemed to wait on a single heartbeat. The valley seemed frozen in that heartbeat. The river's roar the only sound between two worlds poised to collide. Elijah felt sweat bead at his temple despite the chill. Every nerve screamed that one wrong word, one flinch, would set off a storm no man could stop. Then, slowly, Chaska lowered his rifle. His eyes never left Carter, his body still taut as a bowstring, but the gesture was deliberate. The warriors shifted, some grumbling under their breath, yet they followed their leader's lead, easing their weapons but keeping them near. Carter scoffed. "You think laying down arms makes you noble? All I see are cowards." But his voice wavered, and Elijah caught it. Behind Carter, two settlers lowered their rifles completely, their eyes darting between Elijah, Aylin, and the warriors. Doubt had sunk its teeth into them. Elijah stepped closer to Carter, his voice low and cutting. "Look at your men, Carter. They ain't eager to die for your pride. You keep pushing, you'll be the one buried here, not them." For a moment, Elijah thought Carter might pull the trigger out of spite. His jaw worked, his eyes wild, but then he spat into the dirt and jerked his rifle away. "This ain't over, McGraw. There'll come a day when the law rides up here, and we'll see who's standing then." He turned his horse sharply. A few settlers followed without hesitation, others lagging, casting uneasy glances at the Lakota before riding off. Their departure left the valley heavy with silence, broken only by the river's endless surge. Chaska's gaze followed them until they vanished into the trees. Then he turned to Elijah, his voice hard. "This day blood was held back, but do not mistake restraint for peace. Their kind will return." Elijah nodded. "I know. But every day without blood is a day with the chance to find another way. You gave your people that chance today." Some of the warriors muttered their disapproval, but Aylin stepped forward, her voice steady. Mata would say the same. Each day without death is a seed planted. Seeds grow if tended. Chaska regarded her in silence, then finally gave a curt nod. "You speak with his spirit." He looked back at Elijah. "And you, mountain man, you stand strange among us. Not Lakota, not settler, yet today you carried words like a shield. For that I will not call you enemy." It was not praise, not acceptance, but it was something Elijah had not heard in years. Respect, given grudgingly but real. It settled deep in his chest, warmer than the firelight. As the tribe made their way back toward their camp, Elijah lingered by the river. The valley was quiet again, yet different. It was no longer the silence of isolation, but the hush after a storm narrowly passed. He stared at the water, its relentless current carrying snowmelt toward lands far away, and thought of how close it had come to carrying blood instead. Aylin joined him, her limp slow but sure. She stood beside him for a long while before speaking. "You carried the weight today. You chose not to run." Elijah let out a slow breath. "Maybe I was tired of running." She studied his face, her eyes softening. "You carry scars, but scars mean you survived. And today your scars gave you strength to stop more wounds." He turned to meet her gaze. "You think Chaska will ever see me as more than a stranger?" Aylin's lips curved faintly. "Stranger is only the first word in a story. What comes after depends on the choices you make." Her words lingered as they walked back toward the cabin, the fire of the camp glowing ahead. Elijah knew the settlers' threat was not gone, and Chaska's suspicion would not vanish overnight. But he also knew something had shifted within him. He was no longer just the mountain man hiding from the world. Spring settled deeper into the valley, the snow receding to the ridges, leaving the meadows green with new growth. The river still thundered with meltwater, but its voice felt less like a warning now, more like a song of renewal. Elijah stood outside his cabin, splitting wood beneath the sun. His axe rose and fell with steady rhythm, but his thoughts wandered far beyond the task. The standoff at the river lingered in his memory. It could have ended in blood, and part of him still marveled that it hadn't. Chaska had not called him friend, but he had spared him the mark of enemy, and that alone was something Elijah never thought he'd earn. The tribe passed near his cabin more often now. Some warriors still eyed him with suspicion, but others gave him curt nods, small gestures of respect. He accepted them without pride, only gratitude. Aylin moved more freely with each passing day. Her limp remained, but she carried it with grace, her hands busy with gathering, weaving, and tending. She often came to Elijah as he worked, her presence softening the sharp edges of solitude. One evening she sat beside him by the fire, her voice low. "You chose to stand with us," she said. "Not many men would. You could have walked away." Elijah poked the fire with a stick, the sparks rising like stars. "I thought about it. Lord knows I did. But I reckon I got tired of living like a man already buried. You pulled me out of the snow as much as I pulled you." She tilted her head. "How so?" "You reminded me that life ain't just surviving. It's standing for something even when it's hard. Maybe especially then." A quiet smile touched her lips, and for a moment the cabin felt less like a fortress and more like a home. Days turned into weeks. The settlers did not return, though the threat still hung over the valley like distant thunder. Elijah knew the peace was fragile, but it was peace all the same. And for the first time in years, he let himself believe that perhaps tomorrow would not always carry the weight of yesterday. One morning, Chaska came to the cabin with 2 hunters. He stood tall, his eyes sharp but less hostile than before. "The council has spoken," he said. "You may walk among us. Not as one of us, but not as stranger. If you keep your word, you will not be alone." Elijah inclined his head, a flicker of something long forgotten stirring inside him. Belonging. "That's more than I ever asked for." Chaska's eyes lingered, then he gave a single nod before departing. Later that day, Aylin found Elijah by the river watching the current. She stood beside him, her hair caught in the breeze. "You have choice now," she said. "You can return to your solitude, or you can step into something new." Elijah's gaze stayed on the water. "For a long time I thought being alone was the only way to keep safe, but safety ain't the same as living. Maybe it's time I stopped hiding." Aylin looked at him, her eyes warm. "Then Matto's dream lives. Not in me alone, but in you too." The words sank deep, a weight and a gift at once. Elijah felt the river's spray on his face, the sun warming his shoulders, and for the first time in years he did not feel hollow. He was still the mountain man, scarred and weathered, but no longer just a shadow against the peaks. As the day faded, Elijah returned to his cabin with Aylin at his side. The firelight flickered against the walls, but it no longer felt like the light of a lonely exile. It was the light of a man who had found a reason to stay, to stand, to live. Before this story ends, remember, subscribe now to follow more tales of survival, honor, and the untamed frontier. And if you want to keep riding through the West, click the video waiting on your screen for the next journey.